My grandmother handed me a black leather folder on Christmas Eve and told me to open it after dessert. I never made it to dessert. I read the first page standing in the kitchen of my own house, and my hands started shaking so hard I had to set my wine glass down before I dropped it. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the moment I realized that the people who were supposed to love me the most had been stealing from me for years. My name is Simone, and I am 34 years old. I own a forensic accounting firm in Houston, Texas. I built it from nothing. No investors, no family loans, no handout. Just me, a second-hand laptop, and an obsessive need to prove that numbers never lie, even when people do. Every year since I turned 30, I hosted Christmas Eve dinner at my home in River Oaks. It is a 4-bedroom house I bought with cash after my firm landed its first 7-figure contract. Nothing flashy by River Oaks standards, but it is mine. Every tile, every light fixture, every square foot paid for with money I earned. That mattered to me more than the property value. This year I went all out. I hired a private caterer who specialized in Southern holiday menus. Smoked prime rib, bourbon-glazed ham, cornbread stuffing with andouille sausage, sweet potato soufflé, the works. I ordered a custom floral arrangement for the dining table, white poinsettias and cedar branches in a crystal vase. I even hired a pianist to play Christmas standards in the living room during cocktails. The total cost was somewhere around $12,000, which honestly felt excessive, but I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted my family to walk through my front door and finally see what I had built. I set the table for 8, place cards with gold calligraphy. My mother Denise at my right, my father Leonard at my left, my older sister Vanessa and her husband Garrett across from them. My grandmother Lorraine at the head, because that is where the matriarch belongs, and 3 additional seats for Garrett's business associates, because Vanessa had called me 2 weeks earlier and asked if she could bring a few extra guests. I said yes without hesitation. I always said yes. By 6:30, the caterer had everything plated and warming. The pianist was playing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." The house smelled like heaven. I was wearing a burgundy wrap dress I had picked out specifically because my mother once told me I looked beautiful in that color. I remember checking my reflection in the hallway mirror and thinking, tonight is the night they finally see me. At 7 o'clock, nobody had arrived. I checked my phone. Nothing. I texted my mother. No response. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. I texted Vanessa. Read receipt. No reply. At 7:15, I called my grandmother. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was calm, steady, the way it always is when something terrible is happening. "Baby," she said, "they are not coming to your house tonight." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "What do you mean?" "Vanessa called your mother this afternoon and told her Garrett was hosting a private holiday reception at his downtown loft. She said there would be important investors there and that the family needed to show up to support his new venture. Your mother and father left an hour ago. They did not even discuss it. They just went." I stood in my dining room staring at 8 empty chairs and a table set for a family that had chosen someone else. Again. The pianist was still playing. The irony of Silent Night filling my empty house was so painful it almost made me laugh. I thanked my grandmother and hung up. Then I sat down at the head of the table and poured myself a glass of the Chateauneuf du Pape I had been saving for the toast. It tasted like absolutely nothing. Let me explain something about my family. My parents worship status. They always have. My father grew up poor in Fifth Ward, and he spent his entire adult life trying to distance himself from that reality. He married my mother, who came from a middle-class family in Third Ward, and together they constructed an elaborate fiction of generational wealth that did not actually exist. They joined the right church, they attended the right galas, they name-dropped the right people. And when Vanessa married Garrett Whitmore, a white tech entrepreneur from Connecticut, who claimed to run a $200 million venture capital fund, my parents acted like she had delivered them to the promised land. Garrett was tall, blonde, impossibly charming, and absolutely full of it. He wore $3,000 watches and drove a matte black Porsche and talked about disrupting verticals and leveraging synergies with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned in his life. My parents adored him. They introduced him at every social function as our son-in-law, the venture capitalist. They deferred to his opinions on everything from politics to real estate to wine, subjects he knew almost nothing about. They treated him like an oracle simply because he was white, wealthy-looking, and married to their eldest daughter. Meanwhile, I was invisible. When I told my parents I was starting a forensic accounting firm, my father laughed and said, "Who is going to hire a girl to audit their books?" When I landed my first Fortune 500 client, my mother said, "That is nice, sweetheart, but when are you going to settle down?" When I bought my house in River Oaks, in cash, at age 31, my father told me I was being irresponsible with money and should have consulted Garrett about investment properties instead. They never asked about my revenue. They never asked about my clients. They never once acknowledged that their youngest daughter had built a firm that generated over $8 million in annual profit. In their minds, I was still the awkward bookish girl who spent too much time with spreadsheets and not enough time finding a husband. So I sat alone at my Christmas Eve dinner, surrounded by food that could feed 20 people, listening to a pianist play holiday songs to an empty room, and I did what I always do. I opened Instagram. Vanessa was live. Of course she was. The screen filled with Garrett's downtown loft. It was all exposed brick and industrial lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Houston skyline. Garrett was standing at a marble island, carving a turkey with theatrical precision, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had a wireless microphone clipped to his collar, which told me everything. This was not a family dinner. This was a production. "Merry Christmas Eve, everyone," Garrett said, flashing his perfect cosmetic teeth at the camera. "We are so blessed to be surrounded by family and incredible people tonight. This is what the holidays are all about. Breaking bread with the ones who matter." The camera panned to my parents. My mother was sitting on a leather sofa, holding a champagne flute, beaming like she had won the lottery. My father was standing behind her, one hand on her shoulder, nodding along to everything Garrett said with the desperate eagerness of a man trying to prove he belonged. Then Vanessa took the phone and turned the camera to herself. She had that look, the one she always gets when she is about to say something cruel while pretending to be compassionate. "A lot of you are asking where my sister is tonight," Vanessa said, tilting her head with exaggerated concern. "Simone is going through some things. She has been really stressed with her little business, and honestly, she can be a lot during the holidays. We just wanted to keep the energy positive tonight. Sometimes love means giving people space, you know?" I watched her deliver that speech to 30,000 followers. I watched my parents nod in agreement in the background. I watched Garrett raise his glass and say, "To family, the real ones," and I watched every single person in that loft laugh and clink their glasses. They did not just exclude me, they rewrote the story. They turned me into the difficult one, the unstable sister, the burden who had to be managed. They erased my success and replaced it with a narrative that made their cruelty look like kindness. I closed the app. I stared at the dark screen of my phone for a long time. Something shifted inside me. The sadness did not disappear exactly. It just moved aside to make room for something harder, something colder, something that had been building for 34 years. Then I heard the front door open. The sound of low heels on hardwood echoed through the foyer. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. I knew that walk. I had known it my entire life. My grandmother Lorraine appeared in the archway of the dining room. She was 81 years old, 5'2", and she carried herself like a woman who had personally built every building on her block, because she had. Lorraine Aldridge owned one of the largest Black-owned commercial real estate portfolios in Southeast Texas. She started with a single duplex in 3rd Ward in 1972 and turned it into a $300 million empire. She did not talk about it. She did not post about it. She just collected rent checks and acquired properties while the rest of the world underestimated her. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat and carrying a black leather folder. She looked at the untouched feast, the empty chairs, and then she looked at me. Her expression did not soften. It sharpened. "Stand up, Simone," she said. I stood. She walked to the table, set the leather folder down next to my mother's place card, and picked up the bottle of Chateauneuf du Pape. She examined the label, nodded with approval, and poured herself a glass. She took a sip before she spoke again. "I did not go to Garrett's little performance tonight," she said. "I would rather eat cold gas station sushi than sit in that man's overpriced warehouse and listen to him pretend he understands money." I almost smiled. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" She tapped the leather folder with one manicured fingernail. "I am giving you a Christmas present. But you are not going to like it at first. You are going to be furious, and then you are going to use it to take back everything they stole from you." She sat down in the chair I had reserved for my mother and crossed her legs. She looked completely at home. She looked like she had been waiting for this moment for years. "Open it," she said. I picked up the folder. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were 3 sections, each separated by colored tabs, red, blue, and black. Start with red, my grandmother instructed. The red section contained a forensic audit of Garrett's venture capital fund, Whitmore Capital Partners. I am a forensic accountant. I read financial documents the way most people read novels, and within 30 seconds I knew exactly what I was looking at. Whitmore Capital was not a $200 million fund. It was barely solvent. The performance reports Garrett had been showing investors were completely fabricated. He was reporting 35% annual returns while the actual portfolio was hemorrhaging cash. Client withdrawals were being paid with money from new investors. It was textbook. It was a Ponzi scheme, and it was already in its death as. His personal finances were even worse. The downtown loft was 3 months behind on leases. The Porsche was financed at 22% interest through a subprime lender. The cashmere sweaters, the watches, the bottle service at every club in Montrose, all of it was funded by credit cards that were maxed to their limits. Garrett Whitmore was not a venture capitalist. He was a con artist running out of runway. I looked up at my grandmother. She was watching me the way a chess player watches an opponent realize they are in checkmate. Keep reading, she said. I opened the blue section. This was the one that made my vision blur. 3 weeks ago, Garrett had convinced my parents to wire $1.5 million into his personal holding company. He told them it was a limited access bridge investment that would triple in value by March. He promised them a guaranteed return. He used every buzzword in the book, and my parents, who had never once asked to see a single audited financial statement, handed over the money without hesitation. But the money did not come from their savings. My parents did not have $1.5 million in liquid assets. They had maybe $200,000 in their retirement accounts and another $100,000 in home equity. The $1.5 million came from an irrevocable trust that my grandmother had established for me when I was born. I read that line 3 times. I read it until the words stopped looking like words and started looking like a weapon pointed directly at my chest. My grandmother had set aside $1.5 million for my future. She told me about it when I turned 18. She said, "This money is yours, Simone. It is a safety net. Do not touch it until you truly need it. Build your own wealth first." And I listened. I never touched it. I built my firm from scratch using my own earnings, my own credit, my own sweat. I was proud of that. I wore my self-made success like armor. And while I was grinding through 70-hour weeks, sleeping on an air mattress in my first office, because I could not afford both rent and payroll, my parents were plotting to drain the one financial safety net I had. They used an outdated power of attorney from when I was a minor, exploiting a custodial loophole that should have been closed when I turned 21. They forged the authorization, they bypassed the bank's verification protocols, and they wired every cent of my inheritance directly into the personal account of a man who was about to be indicted by the federal government. I remember a specific moment 5 years ago. I was sitting in my parents' living room, wearing a suit I bought at a consignment shop, holding a bound business plan I had spent 2 months writing. I asked my father for a $40,000 loan to hire my first employee. He did not even open the binder. He pushed it back across the coffee table and said, "Simone, nobody is going to pay you to look at receipts. Stop playing business and go get a real job. Garrett could get you an entry-level position at his fund if you ask him nicely." My mother was standing by the window. She did not look at me. She just said, "Your sister married a man who actually understands how money works. Maybe you should take notes instead of asking for handouts." They looked me in the face and told me they had nothing to spare. Then they turned around and gave my entire inheritance to the man they told me to worship. I closed the blue folder. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. Something had locked into place inside me, something precise and mechanical, like the hammer of a gun being pulled back. "What is in the black section?" I asked. My grandmother set down her wine glass. "The black section is the reason I am here tonight instead of at that loft," she said. 3 days ago, my forensic team intercepted a filing from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Garrett's fund has been under federal investigation for 11 months. The FBI has been monitoring his wire transfers, his emails, and his phone calls. They have documented over $12 million in securities fraud and wire fraud across 6 states. A sealed indictment was signed by a federal magistrate last Tuesday. They are planning to execute arrest warrants after the holiday. She paused. "Your parents wired your trust fund into an account that is currently flagged by the Department of Justice. The money is frozen. Garrett cannot spend it. Your parents cannot get it back. And when the FBI traces the origin of that wire, they are going to find your mother's and father's signatures on a fraudulent transfer document. They did not just steal from you, Simone. They made themselves accomplices to a federal crime. The room was very quiet. The pianist had stopped playing. I could hear the ice settling in the champagne bucket on the sideboard. I looked at my grandmother. She was not crying. She was not angry. She was waiting. She had given me the diagnosis. Now she wanted to see if I had the nerve to perform the surgery. They are at that loft right now, I said slowly, drinking champagne and laughing at me on a live stream, and they have no idea that the man they sold me out for is about to go to federal prison. They have absolutely no idea, my grandmother confirmed. Garrett has kept them completely in the dark. He told them the wire transfer was a routine capital location. He promised them a massive return. They believed him because believing him is easier than questioning a white man in an expensive sweater. I stood up from the table. I buttoned my coat. I picked up the black leather folder and held it against my chest like a shield. My grandmother stood up too. She reached for her cane, a polished mahogany cane with a silver handle shaped like a magnolia blossom. It was the only vanity she allowed herself. "What are you going to do?" she asked. But she already knew the answer. She had known the answer before she walked through my door. "I am going to his loft," I said, "and I am going to burn his entire operation to the ground while my parents watch." My grandmother nodded once. A slow, satisfied nod. Then she picked up her coat and said, "Let us go. I have been waiting a very long time for this." The elevator doors opened directly into Garrett's loft. That was the kind of building it was, a converted warehouse with a private elevator for the penthouse unit, because Garrett needed everyone to feel like they were ascending to something important. The noise hit us first. Jazz music, laughter, the clinking of expensive glasses. The loft was packed with people who had no business being at a family Christmas Eve dinner. I recognized a city councilwoman, a hospital administrator, two partners from a downtown law firm, and a retired NFL player who had recently started a charitable foundation. These were not friends, these were marks. Garrett had assembled a room full of wealthy, trusting people, so he could pitch them on his collapsing fund during the holidays, when their guard was down and their wallets were open. Garrett was holding court near the kitchen island, gesturing with a glass of bourbon, telling a story about a pre-IPO investment that had supposedly netted his clients a 60% return. The people around him were nodding, impressed, already reaching for their checkbooks in their minds. He was a predator camouflaged as a host. Vanessa was circulating through the crowd, playing the role of the glamorous tech wife. She was wearing a white sequin dress and a diamond pendant that probably cost more than a teacher's annual salary. She laughed at every joke, touched every arm, made every guest feel like they were part of an exclusive inner circle. She was good at it. She had been performing her entire life. My parents were positioned near the windows, clutching their drinks, trying to look relaxed. My mother kept smoothing the front of her dress. My father kept adjusting his tie. They looked like two people who had paid an enormous price for admission and were terrified someone would ask to see the receipt. My grandmother's cane hit the concrete floor first. That sound, the sharp rhythmic tap of mahogany on polished concrete, cut through the jazz music like a metronome. Tap, step, tap, step. People turned. In Houston's black business community, everyone knows who Lorraine Aldridge is. She does not attend events. Events attend her. The fact that she was standing in this loft, uninvited on Christmas Eve, carrying a leather folder and wearing an expression that could freeze the Brazos River, sent an immediate signal to every power player in the room. Something was about to happen. I walked beside her. I was not hiding behind anyone. I was not shrinking into the background. I was wearing a black tailored blazer over my burgundy dress, and I held the leather folder at my side like a lawyer approaching the bench. Garrett saw us first. His bourbon stopped halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. He recovered quickly, the way con artists always do, and pasted on a bright, welcoming smile. "Lorraine, what a wonderful surprise," he said, opening his arms as if greeting a beloved relative. "And Simone, we were just talking about you. Come in, let me get you both a drink." My grandmother did not acknowledge him. She walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, found the most prominent spot in the open living area and planted herself there. She rested both hands on the silver handle of her cane and waited. Vanessa materialized at my side within seconds. She grabbed my elbow and pulled me toward the hallway, her fingernails digging into my skin through the blazer. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low enough that the nearest guests could not hear. "I told you this was a private event. You were not invited, you are embarrassing yourself." I looked down at her hand on my arm. I did not pull away. I just looked at it until she let go on her own. You are right, Vanessa. I was not invited. But then again, I was not invited to Christmas Eve dinner at my own house either, since my entire family decided to come here instead. So I figured I would bring the party to me. Vanessa crossed her arms. She glanced over her shoulder at the guests, calculating how much damage my presence was doing to her carefully curated image. Simone, please. You are always doing this. You always have to make everything about you. Garrett is in the middle of very important meetings. These people are high net worth individuals. They do not need to see our family drama. Just go home, eat your leftovers, and we will talk after the holidays. I smiled at her. It was not a warm smile. You should probably stop talking and start listening, Vanessa. Because in about 2 minutes, every high net worth individual in this room is going to learn exactly how your husband funded this party. Vanessa's face went blank, not angry, not confused. Blank. Like her brain had encountered an error message it could not process. Before she could respond, my parents arrived. My mother was walking fast, her heels clicking against the concrete, her face flushed with a cocktail of anger and embarrassment. My father was right behind her, his jaw set, his eyes locked on me with the familiar look of disapproval I had memorized since childhood. Simone Elaine Aldridge, my mother whispered fiercely, gripping my wrist. You are leaving this building right now. I do not care what petty grudge you are nursing. You will not ruin this night for your sister. Let go of my arm, Mother. She did not let go. She squeezed harder. I said let go. Something in my voice made her release me. She stepped back, rubbing her own hands as if my skin had burned her. I looked at both of my parents. I took a breath. Then I spoke loudly enough for the nearest circle of guests to hear every word. I know about the trust fund. 4 words, that is all it took. My mother's face collapsed. My father's entity body went rigid, like someone had run an electric current through his spine. I know that 3 weeks ago you used a forged power of attorney to drain the $1.5 million irrevocable trust that Grandma Lorraine established for me at birth. I know you wired that money directly into Garrett's personal holding account. And I know you did it without telling me, without asking me, and without understanding what you were actually funding. My father raised his hands, palms out, the universal gesture of a man trying to contain an explosion. Simone, keep your voice down. You do not understand high finance. Garrett identified a once-in-a-lifetime investment window. Your money was just sitting in that trust, doing nothing. He is going to return it with a 40% premium by Q1. We did this for the whole family. You did not make an investment, Dad. I opened the leather folder and pulled out the first document. You made a donation to a federal crime scene. I held up the forensic audit so the nearest guests could see the header. The room was getting quieter. People were turning. The jazz pianist sensed the shift and lowered his volume instinctively. Whitmore Capital Partners has been under investigation by the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission for 11 months, I said, projecting my voice clearly across the loft. Your son-in-law is not a venture capitalist. He is running a Ponzi scheme. He has been paying existing investors with money from new clients. He has siphoned over $12 million through shell companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. He used stolen funds to lease this loft, finance that Porsche parked downstairs, and buy the diamond around my sister's neck. The room went completely silent. The jazz stopped. Someone set down a glass too hard, and the sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Garrett stepped forward. He was sweating now, but his voice was still controlled. He was a professional liar, and he was not going to go down without performing. This is absurd, Garrett said, looking around the room with a practiced expression of calm amusement. Simone is an accountant. She is not a federal investigator. She is clearly going through a difficult time, and I think we should all give her some grace. Forensic audits are complex documents that can be easily misinterpreted by people who do not understand institutional finance. He turned to the city councilwoman, who was watching the scene with narrowing eyes. Margaret, you and I discussed the Urban Development Fund last week. You saw the projections. You know the returns are real. This is a family disagreement, not a financial crisis. I let him dig. Every word he spoke was another shovel of dirt in his own grave. When he finished, I pulled out the second document. This one had a seal on it that needed no explanation. The Blue Eagle of the Department of Justice. This is a courtesy copy of a sealed federal indictment, I said. 31 counts. Securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, bank fraud. The arrest warrants were signed by a federal magistrate last Tuesday. The FBI is executing them after the holiday weekend. I looked directly at the city councilwoman. Margaret, Garrett pitched you his urban development fund because he needs $2 million by Monday morning to cover a margin call with the SEC. If he does not deposit that money, his assets get frozen and the arrest happens immediately. You are not an investor to him. You are a life raft. And the money he would take from you would go directly into a holding account that is already being monitored by the Department of Justice. Margaret stood up so fast her chair scraped against the concrete. She grabbed her clutch and her coat and did not say a single word. She walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button with the controlled fury of a woman who had just narrowly avoided a catastrophe. The retired NFL player was next. He looked at Garrett with an expression of absolute betrayal. I gave you $500,000 6 months ago, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You told me it was going into a clean tech portfolio. You showed me returns. I showed you fabricated returns, I said gently, because he deserved the truth more than he deserved my protection. His fund has been insolvent since March. Your money was used to pay back older investors who were threatening to sue. It is gone. The player pulled out his phone and started making calls before he even reached the elevator. One by one, the guests left. The law firm partners practically ran. The hospital administrator called her attorney from the elevator. Within 5 minutes, Garrett's loft went from a packed holiday celebration to an empty crime scene. Garrett's mask finally shattered. He spun around to face my parents, and the charm evaporated like steam. This is your fault, Garrett screamed, pointing at my father. I told you to wire the money to the offshore account. I told you to use the Cayman routing number, but you sent it to the domestic holding company because you could not follow simple instructions. You triggered the federal flag. You incompetent, gullible old man. You ruined everything. My father flinched as if he had been slapped. The man he had worshipped, the son-in-law he had chosen over his own daughter, was now screaming in his face and calling him a fool. The hierarchy he had so desperately bought into was crumbling, and Garrett did not even have the decency to let him down gently. Vanessa was standing by the windows, shaking. Her white sequin dress suddenly looked garish and cheap under the industrial lights. She was staring at Garrett as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Garrett, tell me this is not true, Vanessa whispered. Tell me we still have the offshore accounts. Tell me we can fix this. Garrett looked at her the way you look at something you are about to throw away. There are no offshore accounts, Chloe. The feds froze everything this morning. I have nothing. We have nothing. Your parents made sure of that when they botched the wire transfer. He called her by the wrong name. He did not even notice. And in that moment, I understood something I had always suspected. Garrett did not love my sister. He did not even see her as a person. She was a prop in his performance, a beautiful black woman on his arm that made him look progressive and connected while he robbed her community blind. My mother collapsed onto the nearest sofa, sobbing. My father stood frozen, staring at the floor, his entire identity dismantled in the span of 10 minutes. Then they turned to my grandmother, Mama Lorraine. My father choked out, stumbling toward her. You have to help us. You have the capital. You can make this go away, pay off the SEC, buy Garrett's fund outright, transfer the loft into Vanessa's name. You fix everything. My grandmother looked at her son for a long time. The silence was excruciating. I built my company one property at a time, she said, her voice steady as stone. I built it during Jim Crow. I built it when banks would not lend to black women. I built it when men like Garrett would not even let me walk through their front doors. And you, my own son, took the inheritance I created for your daughter and handed it to a white man who would not spit on you if you were on fire. She tapped her cane once against the floor. I will not spend a single dollar to save you from the consequences of your own cowardice. You chose this man over your own child. You chose proximity to whiteness over loyalty to your own blood. Now you get to live with that choice. My father crumbled. He actually sank to his knees on the concrete floor, his expensive suit wrinkling, his pride disintegrating. My mother slid off the sofa and knelt beside him, reaching for my grandmother's hand, begging, "Please, Mama, we will lose the house. We will go to prison. Think about the family name." The family name, my grandmother repeated, and for the first time that night, I heard genuine anger in her voice. You are worried about the family name? You dragged the family name through a federal indictment because you were too starstruck to ask your son-in-law for a single audited financial statement. The family name is fine. Simone carries it now. She stepped aside, and suddenly there was nothing between my parents and me. They looked up from the floor, their faces swollen and with tears, and for the first time in my life they actually saw me. Not the awkward, bookish daughter. Not the girl who played with spreadsheets, not the failure who could not find a husband. They saw the woman who held every document, every fact, every number that would determine whether they spent the next decade in a federal prison or a free country. Maya, my mother begged. I mean Simone, please, you run a firm. You know people. You can talk to the prosecutors, you can explain that we did not know what Garrett was doing, you can protect us. I looked down at her. I thought about the consignment shop suit. I thought about the business plan my father would not open. I thought about every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday where I was the afterthought, the obligation, the empty chair nobody missed. I thought about all of it, and then I let it go. I reached into the leather folder and pulled out one final document. It was not a federal filing, it was a property deed. 6 months ago, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The management company that holds the master lease on this building defaulted on its primary mortgage obligation. The lender initiated foreclosure proceedings. Grandma Lorraine's firm held the senior debt position. She offered me the opportunity to purchase the distressed note at a significant discount. I held up the deed. I bought it. This building, this loft, this floor you are kneeling on, I own it. The deed transferred into my name 72 years ago. The sound my mother made was not a scream and not a sob. It was something in between, a sound I had never heard a human being make before. My father just stared at me with his mouth open, unable to reconcile the daughter he had dismissed with the woman who now literally owned the ground beneath his feet. Garrett, I said, turning to face him. He was leaning against the kitchen island, gray-faced, barely breathing. You are currently occupying a unit in my building, under a lease that is 90 days in default. I am serving you with a formal notice of eviction effective immediately. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings. Everything else, the furniture, the art, the sound system, stays as collateral against your outstanding debt. I set the eviction notice on the kitchen island next to the half-carved turkey. Then I looked at my parents and my sister. You three are not on the lease. You are unauthorized guests on my private property. You have 15 minutes to collect your coats and leave. Vanessa let out a broken wail. She grabbed my arm, her diamond pendant swinging wildly. Simone, I am your sister. You cannot do this to me. Where am I supposed to go? I gently removed her hand. You told 30,000 people tonight that I was difficult and that you needed space from me. Consider this all the space you will ever need. I turned to my grandmother. She was standing exactly where she had been the entire time, both hands on her magnolia cane, her face unreadable except for the faintest trace of pride in the corners of her eyes. Let us go, Grandma, I said. The air in here is not worth breathing. We walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. The doors opened with a soft chime. We stepped inside. His voice was raw, desperate, stripped of every pretension he had spent his life constructing. The 1.5 million yenzer. When the FBI comes, they are going to trace that wire directly to us. You have contacts. You have crisis management relationships. You have to help us scrub our names from that transfer. I held the elevator door open with one hand. Dad, I said, who do you think gave the FBI the domestic link to trace that wire in the first place? The sound my mother made when those words hit her will stay with me for the rest of my life. My forensic team compiled every digital footprint connected to that fraudulent transfer, I continued. Every timestamp, every IP address, every forged signature. I packaged it and delivered it to the U.S. Attorney's office 3 days ago. You are not collateral damage. You are co-conspirators. And the evidence came from your own daughter. I let go of the elevator door. The steel panels began to slide shut. Through the narrowing gap, I saw my family one last time. My mother was on the floor, clutching her chest. My father was leaning against the wall, staring at nothing. Vanessa was sitting on the concrete, her white sequined dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Garrett was motionless at the kitchen island, a hollow man waiting for the sirens. The doors closed with a quiet final click. The drive back to River Oaks was silent. My grandmother sat beside me in the back seat, her cane resting across her lap, looking out the window at the Christmas lights strung along Westheimer Road. She did not need to say anything. Neither did I. Some victories do not require narration. They just require presence. When I walked back into my house, the dining room was exactly as I had left it. 8 place settings, gold calligraphy name cards, cold prime rib, and untouched soufflé. A few hours ago, this table had represented everything I wanted and could not have. Now it just looked like a very expensive reminder of who I used to be. I sat down at the head of the table. I poured myself a fresh glass of the Chateauneuf du Pape. This time, it tasted extraordinary. For 34 years, I believed that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, sacrificed enough, my family would eventually pull out a chair for me. I believed that love was something you earned through performance. I believed that their approval was the metric that mattered most. I was wrong. The people who are supposed to love you do not get to define your value. Your parents do not get to measure your worth. Your sister does not get to narrate your story. And the man they chose over you does not get to sit at your table. If they will not make room for you, stop asking for room. Build your own house. Buy their building. And leave them standing in the lobby wondering how they lost the only person who actually had the keys. I raised my glass to the empty room. Merry Christmas to me. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you most in order to finally love yourself? Tell me your story in the comments. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Silent Revenge for more stories about reclaiming your power and writing your own ending.